In this session, I'm going to explain how you can use questioning in order to trigger student reflection in relation to self-regulated learning and metacognition. And these are two slightly different focuses which should become very, very clear by the end of this video. In essence, self-regulated learning is about the regulation of learning processes, the strategies and activities and things students do in order to learn, whereas metacognition is about the regulation of the cognitive processes, the thinking processes that students engage in and with whilst they are trying to learn. Let's start by having a look at the planning phase of this cyclical model, which can be used very usefully to help structure and understand both the self-regulated learning cycle and the metacognitive cycle. And what we're really aiming for through this questioning is to establish a kind of positive upward spiral of self-improvement in the student's mind, so that they're improving both their learning strategies and the cognitive processes that they're engaging with and in during the learning process. Let's start by having a look at the planning phase of these cycles and the kinds of questions that we can ask in order to get students engaged with this upward cycle. So what questions might we ask during the planning phase in order to foster reflections around self-regulated learning? We might ask, what is the best strategy for learning about this topic? And this is a question that can refer both to how students are engaging in learning in the classroom and of course the learning that takes place outside of the classroom. It can be a useful question to foster independent learning skills and attitudes. You might even phrase it as, if there were no teachers, how would you learn about this topic yourself? And so you're encouraging students to think about how they might plan the learning process, how they might plan certain strategies in order to learn. What obstacles might you face when learning about this? We're asking students to anticipate the challenges that they might face, maybe reflect on some of the obstacles they've encountered previously, and to think about how they might overcome these obstacles in advance. How can you learn the most from this activity? What's your plan for meeting the learning objectives today? You might even ask this question before setting any learning activities. It might be the start of the lesson. You might show the students learning objectives and ask them what the best strategy would be in order to meet those learning objectives if you as a teacher just disappeared into thin air at that point. And so you're shifting the onus of responsibility onto students. And there's something very existential about some of these questions. Sometimes you might want to use the language of choice. What do you need to choose to do in order to learn about this? What do you need to choose to not do so as to not hold yourself back when it comes to learning? What could you do in order to maximize learning here? What could you do in order to maximize the learning that you're getting from this activity? Often students kind of go through the motions, and the outside observer, to them it might appear as if the student is learning, but what we're really working on here is those internal processes, those internal choices around how the student is engaging with learning. When it comes to metacognition, the questions emphasize the cognitive aspect of the learning process. They use the language of thought and thinking, such as what is the best way to think during activities like this one? What style of thinking will help you to learn the most? Which thinking skills do you need to make use of during a task like this one? How do you need to think in order to succeed in this task? And how can you use your strengths as a learner to succeed here? And you might think, well, this last question isn't particularly about thought or cognition, but the reason I include it is because one aspect of metacognition is metacognitive knowledge. That is, what do students know about themselves as learners, about the strategies they should employ, and Understanding one's strengths and weaknesses as a learner is a form of metacognitive knowledge, and a question like this is drawing on metacognitive knowledge, but also triggering metacognitive reflections that can help students to arrive at that knowledge, at that understanding of themselves as a learner. During the monitoring phase of this cycle, what we're really trying to achieve is awareness, is consciousness, perhaps, dare I say, even mindfulness. We're hoping to shift the student away from distracting thoughts or unconscious processes and help them to pay attention to what they're really doing in order to learn and what they're really doing with their minds in terms of the cognitive processes. So we might ask questions such as these. Which strategies are you using to learn right now? Notice the use of this word now. We're trying to draw students' awareness back into the present moment so that they're really becoming aware of what they are doing right there and then, right here and now. What obstacles are arising right now that reduce the learning process, that reduce learning? And how can you overcome those obstacles? So just as in the planning phase where we hoped students might anticipate obstacles, during the monitoring phase, we're hoping that they're actually noticing the arising of obstacles and engaging with those obstacles so that they can overcome them. What are you doing at this moment that helps you to learn? And in contrast, what are you choosing to do during this task that hinders learning? And notice the use of that word choosing. We're using again the language of choice so that we help students to become aware that actually it's down to them. They can choose to do things that help them to learn. They can choose to do things that hinder their learning. And often they compare themselves to other students and think, they are the good students, I am not a good student. And this goes against the kind of growth mindset that we're hoping to inculcate in students. And this language of choice helps students to realize that it's not a fixed attribute. The things that are holding them back during learning are often the choices that they are making in terms of the learning strategies they're using and how they're actually engaging in those strategies. And so finally, how are you engaging with this learning activity? This refers perhaps to motivation, perhaps to the degree of engagement with the activity. And metacognition. Are you paying attention to what you're thinking at the moment? Often we get kind of lost in thought. We end up ruminating about this or that, worrying about the past or the future. But learning takes place in the present moment. It demands a degree of concentration, and these monitoring questions help refocus the mind, help students to really pay attention to what they are doing with their mind. What style of thinking are you using right now? Notice that these aren't necessarily evaluative questions. That's for the next phase. What are you doing with your mind during this learning activity? What's going through your head as you engage with this task? And are you thinking about this task and this learning, or are you thinking about something else? So these questions help to cultivate a kind of mindfulness and help to bring students back into the driver's seat so that they're conscious of what's going through their head, what they're thinking, and what the cognitive processes are that they are generating or engaging with. During the evaluation phase, what we're hoping to use these questions for is triggering student reflections that evaluate, in terms of self-regulated learning, these strategies, activities, behaviours that students are engaging in order to learn. The basic question really is this working? Is this actually helping you to learn? How are the different strategies you're choosing to use impacting your learning? And in relation to metacognition, it's similar, but it is crucially quite different because the focus is on evaluation of the cognitive processes. Is this style of thinking that you're engaging in helping you to learn, for example? Some of the questions you might ask include: how effective was your approach to learning? Or how effective is your current approach to learning? Did your learning strategy help or hinder your learning? What were the strengths and weaknesses of your approach? What did you do that helped or hindered your learning? To what extent did this activity really help you to learn? And how did your choices impact how much you learn? So again, we're getting a bit existential here and helping students to realise that actually their choices are what is influencing their ability to learn here. And for metacognition, we might ask, how effective was your style of thinking during this task? What were the strengths and weaknesses of your style of thinking? What did you do with your mind that helped you to learn? Or in contrast, what did you do with your mind that got in the way of learning? And we might be particularly interested in this area, this topic of distraction. We might ask questions around distraction. Were the students distracted and so not really thinking clearly about what they were doing because they were thinking about other things? I think that's a big issue that metacognition can help address. What did you do with your mind that helped or hindered your learning? And what thinking skills helped you to get the most from this task? The regulation phase depends on the other three phases, but obviously in a way it is the most important of all of them, because this is the phase where we get students thinking about what they need to change, what they need to be doing differently moving forward, and how they can improve their approach to learning. So we might ask questions such as: how can you improve your approach to learning? What could you have done differently to learn more during this task, or to learn more during tasks like this moving forward? What might you do now in order to remember what you've learnt today? So we're asking students to take responsibility for solidifying their learning and thinking about what they might do even after the class has ended, outside of the lesson, in order that their learning can be more solidified. If you want to learn more, or if you wanted to learn more, what would the next step be? We're encouraging students to take responsibility for the learning process itself, and hopefully helping them to become more independent learners, have a more independent attitude to learning, where they are the ones in control of the process. How might you overcome the obstacles to learning that you encountered today? So we're getting students to think about how in the future, if they were to face the same challenges again, they might respond to them a bit more effectively. And finally, we might ask, what did effective learners do that ineffective learners did not do? And I love this question. It really helps students to understand this growth mindset attitude, the idea that in the classroom, whilst some students learn more than others, this is largely not really to do with the attributes and qualities of the learners, but what they are choosing to do as they are trying to learn. And again, it puts the responsibility on the shoulders of the learner themselves and helps them to avoid this passivity whereby, oh, I'm just an ineffective learner and there's nothing I can do about it. You're really getting them to think about how they can improve their approach to learning. With metacognition, again, the focus is on the cognitive processes, the thinking. So how could you improve your style of thinking during tasks like this? How could you think differently in order to learn more? Which thinking skills could you use to get more from tasks like this? You might focus on what the students need to change about their thinking. How could you change the way you think in order to learn more? You might also focus on higher order thinking skills, which higher order thinking skills could you use in order to get more out of the learning process? How might thinking differently have helped you to learn more? So the focus again is on how the student is thinking whilst they are learning. If you wanted to develop your questioning skills in relation to self-regulated learning and metacognition, please do visit globalmetacognition.com. We've created a range of teacher prompt cards which contain hundreds of questions, and you can download this absolutely free, no registration or sign up required or anything. It's in the free download section at globalmetacognition.com. So hopefully you'll check that out. If you found this video useful, please do like, please do subscribe, and check out some of our other videos that we've made here at the Global Metacognition Institute. Thank you so much for listening, and have a nice day.